Chapter 17, Bloodleaf. Ready? Go. Page 157. When we returned, Zan was waiting impatiently, shifting from foot to foot on Kate's doorstep. "You're late," he said crossly. "Not true," Kate said, "and you know it." Hands on her hips, she added, "Did you do what I asked?" He gave an impertinent shrug and a half nod. Delighted, Kate grabbed my hand and pulled me down the walk. "This way," she said. We didn't have to go far. Kate led me to the hut behind her house, the one next to the goose pond. We waited while Zan worked the lock of the hut with a rusty key, and when the door finally opened, it did so with a groan. "Zan, you were supposed to clean it first," Kate said, swiping her finger across a dirty table. "I did." Kate pursed her lips. "I suppose this is what I get for assuming cleaning is something you'd know how to do." She turned to me. "Do you like it? I know it's small. I've only ever used it as an extra place to store my dried herbs and extra bottles of tonics and preserves. I'm sorry it's such a mess. That's what we get for letting Zan draw here unsupervised. But it's not terrible, right?" It was dim, the only light coming from one grimy back window. There was a stone fireplace with a hook for a kettle, a small table and rickety chair. The walls were lined with shelves, mostly containing rows of colored bottles and jars of herbs, but 2 or 3 were completely crammed with papers and pencils and charcoal sticks of varying lengths. I lifted a sheet of paper from a stack and had to turn it twice to make sense of it. At first glance, it looked like a mess of furious black charcoal marks zigging and zagging in no meaningful pattern, but as I looked at it more closely, an image began to emerge from the chaos. It was a detailed study of a bird's wing, I realized, but it was so unlike the fussy, meticulous renderings that populated books and paintings that I wondered if I'd ever actually seen a bird before. This was less a catalog of traits, feather, beak, bone, breast, and more an encapsulation of all the joy and terror of flight. It was breathtaking. The paper was tugged out of my hands mid-stare. Zan added it to a stack he was hastily trying to straighten before giving up and roughly shoving it out of sight. Sheepishly, he said, "Just make a pile in the corner there. I'll come collect everything later." I turned back to the sparsely equipped room. "I love everything about this," I said happily as I lowered myself onto the single cot set up in the corner. It creaked mightily in protest. "But I have no money to pay rent." Zan started to say something, but Kate gave him a pointed glare before smiling sweetly at me. "No rent is needed. Zan will cover it with the money he owes you for borrowing your horse. Won't you, Zan?" He gave a tight-lipped nod. "Of course." "And he's going to pay you a wage," Kate added. "Yes, but not until after a daily wage with a bonus when the work is done." I tilted my head. "A gold statue in my likeness," I was told. "It will be erected in the town square the next day," Zan said, beleaguered. "On my honor." "Don't let him sculpt it himself," Kate said. "His drawings are all right if you know what you're looking at first, but his sculptures—" She cringed and shook her head. "Can we go now?" Zan said, sounding snippy. Kate had already grabbed a broom. "Would you please? It looks like I have some work to do." "Were all those drawings really yours?" I asked as Zan helped me down into the culvert. "You don't look like an artist." He gave me a sideways glance. "You don't look like a blood mage, and yet—" Inside the passage now, Zan was setting the pace, which could only be called a meander. "I got very sick when I was a child. Had to spend a lot of time indoors. My mother started me drawing to stave off boredom. But I got sicker, even lost my eyesight for a while. Shortly after that, I lost my mother." "I'm sorry," I said. "Was she sick too?" "Sick of caring for me, maybe." He paused, trying to be delicate, but I knew what he was trying to say. "I was ill constantly. It took a toll. Don't look at me like that. It was a long time ago." He waved me forward at the fork. "This way now." Instead of taking the turn out toward the tower, we continued straight, up a slightly ascending slope. He maintained his unhurried pace. "You don't have to go so slow for me today," I said. I heal very quickly. I put a hand to my injured side. I hardly feel it anymore. Who said I was going slow for you? He asked. The new alley came to an abrupt end beneath a square drawn in dim light, a trap door. Zan gave it a tug, and the hatch swung down, a frayed rope ladder along with it. He went up first and then steadied me as I climbed after him. I wanted to ask him more about his drawings, but he put his finger to his lips as a warning to keep quiet while he reset the door and the ladder. We were in the cellar, surrounded on all sides by barrels of ale and shelves lined with bottles of wine. Outside the cellar room, sad cries echoed around the stone chambers. The dungeon's that way, he said quietly, lips close to my ear. It always sounds like this on Petitioner's Day. He cast his eyes around the corner. It's clear. Let's go. The grandiosity of the castle did not end at its facade. The interior was just as intricately decorated, if not more. Polished timber buttresses soared into vaulted ceilings decorated with intricate floral reliefs. Everything was painstakingly carved and painted with rich, heady colors. Gold, burgundy, lapis, purple. It was hard to tear my eyes away. There was a distant rumble of voices and music from somewhere in the heart of the castle. The Petitioner's Day banquet was being prepared, Zan said, but the halls were largely empty. When a servant, on his way to some task or another, did hasten past, Zan ducked into a pocket of shadows and pulled me in with him before we could be seen. Why are you sneaking around? I hissed. Isn't this your home? When the coast was clear, he replied, I find it advantageous to keep my comings and goings to myself. There are too many people who think they know better than I how I should use my time. I understood that notion all too well. I spent my whole life doing the same. The library, when we finally came to it, was an enormous circular room, 2 stories high, with a sweeping balcony on the top level. The tiles beneath our feet were black and white marble, and dangling from the pinnacle of the ceiling was a chandelier of crystal stars that clinked and turned in a slow orbit around a shimmering, blown glass moon. And there were books. Everywhere books. Blood of the Founder, I breathed. This is incredible. You don't have libraries in I don't know why I said it. You don't have libraries in Renault? Not like this, I said. There's only one book they want us to worry about, the Founder's Book of Commands. Explains why Prince Conrad loves this room so much. He spends much of his free time here, drags his sister with him too. This afternoon I wasn't sure they'd leave in time for me to bring you today. Oh? I said, trying not to sound overly interested. And what books did he want to look at? Books on pirates, treasure hunts, things like that. My feelings were all mixed up. I wasn't sure if I should be happy that Conrad was reading about pirates and that Lisette was taking good care of him, or jealous that she was doing so at my expense. You were with them? Some of the afternoon, before they were called away to watch the Petitioner's Day spectacle. I know you're wary of Aurelia, Emily, and I respect your decision to keep your presence here a secret, but I don't think you have anything to fear. She seems lovely. I immediately imagined him drawing her with those decisive charcoal strokes to commit her beauty to his memory. I'm ashamed to say that the rush of renewed distaste I had for Lisette at that moment had little to do with Conrad. I'm sure it looks that way, I said curtly, but looks can be deceiving, can't they? You tell me, he said, but before I could ask him what he meant, he turned lazily on his heel and I had no choice but to follow him. He led me to a sheltered corner of the library where a cushioned window seat beckoned, a pile of books beside it. I made good use of my time this morning. Vitessio's Compendium de Magia, Wilstein's essays on blood magic theory. There was even an anthology on the uses of feral magic for increasing crop yields, soybeans included, alongside dozens of other texts and histories, all in pristine condition. I may cry, I said, reverently touching the bindings. Please don't, Zan said. Many of those books were brought here after the Assembly of Mages was dismantled. They're very valuable. I don't want tears all over them, wrinkling the pages and running the ink. You can find references to Oklev's spells here. He lifted a book and placed it in a new pile. Here and here. I'm still trying to find his original writings, but you can use these to get started. Zian left me there to immerse myself in the materials while he went off on his errand. I settled myself into cushions with the volumes on my lap, eager to read from books left uncensored. But I had turned only to the first page when I heard voices nearby. "Do hurry," a girl said. "The banquet will begin soon, and we can't be late. It's just a toy. Is it really that important? And are you certain you left it in here and not in the great hall?" "I know it was in here. I had it by the window." My eyes tracked to the other side of the seat. Sure enough, a small object was resting there, a metal figurine with shifting pieces, small enough to hide in the palm of a hand. I knew it immediately. I'd used it as a prize for one of the seek and find games I played with Conrad, something to help him sit still and calm during the most tedious of the princely tasks. I didn't know he still possessed it, much less that he had carried it with him all the way from Renault. I'd never seen him take it out during the journey, not once. But there it sat on the library seat, left behind mid-transformation, halfway between a hound and a hare. I grabbed it and scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. Conrad had turned the corner and was blinking at me with round, saucer-shaped eyes. We regarded each other for a heavy minute before I slowly turned the remaining pieces. Click, twist, click, and handed it back to him, a fully formed hare. He took it soundlessly. "Well?" Lisette asked from the other side of the library. "Did you find it?" I waited, heart pounding, for his response. With one word, he could condemn me dead. Finally, he said over his shoulder, "Yes, I've got it. I'm coming." I peered through a bookshelf as he bounded back to Lisette. She ruffled his hair. "You'd lose your mind if it weren't locked up in that silly head of yours," she said, smiling as they left together. He didn't look back. That night, beneath the last waxing crescent before the first quarter, I snuck back to the castle grounds and even over to the west side. If Conrad's bedroom was in this wing, he'd have a decent view of these gardens from his window. I pulled the ribbon from my hair, blue, one of Kate's hand-me-downs, and knotted it tightly around a branch of a rose bush. Then I dropped to my knees and dug a small hole in the dirt just below it, praying that he remembered our old game. Yellow for up, blue for down, and red for north, green for south. When the hole was big enough, I dropped the winged horse charm in and covered it up. I hoped it was enough to convey my message. "I'm right here, little brother. I didn't abandon you. Don't feel stupid." And that is the end of chapter 17. So, I will see you next time when we read chapter 18 from Bloodleaf. Yeah, that's all. Toodaloo.